of Art. I'm Holly Greenberg, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about the work of tonight's visiting artist, Marty Tubles Jr. And tonight we have the pleasure of welcoming Rafa Esparza back to introduce our artist. So over to you, Rafa.
Whoa, thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thank you, Castles and Jess and Holly, for bringing me back to introduce Marty Tubles Jr. I took, just thinking back to when I first met you, Marty, and wrote this brief intro. But so I first met Marty Tubles Jr. in Omaha, Nebraska in the winter of 2017 at a show that we were both curated in by Risa Puleo titled Monarchs, Brown and Native Contemporary Artists in the Path of the Butterfly, which first premiered at the Bima Center for Contemporary Arts. I remember receiving an email with the final list of artist names and being overwhelmed with excitement as I began to look up and learn about all of the amazing Brown and Native artists included in the show, many of whom I eventually got to meet in person during the opening. And I remember being excited for various reasons, but one that stands out for me was the possibility of getting to meet and to have conversations with my peers in the show about how we navigate the art world as Brown and Native Indigenous artists, how we practice our creativity within the Eurocentric import we know as art that has been largely inherited and assimilated culturally across the globe. While contemporary art can be described as the most dynamic, inclusive, and diverse moment of cultural production in art history, it's still boggled down or propelled, depending on who you ask, by a legacy of white supremacy, colonialism, and patriarchy. And so I think it's important for us to remember that there are multiple ways of being contemporary in this world, especially for those of us that exist in these histories and modernities that have evolved within, alongside, and outside of the paradigms that frame how we see and experience the dominant culture. And so it's such an honor to be able to introduce Marty Tubles Jr., whose work exists broadly, intersectionally, and nuanced across these structural and historic differences, and dare I say, conflicts. Yet Marty's practice does not abandon a history or legacy in favor of another. He instead embraces the personal and cultural significances that offer portals into a continuum of aesthetic knowledge, curiosity, and rigor that too oftentimes gets neglected, erased, tokenized, or not fully explored. I'm grateful for having the opportunity to work with Marty at In Plain Sight, and in spite of how wretched and difficult the world sometimes feels, I celebrate the opportunity to be an artist alongside one such as himself. Marty Tubles Jr. is an artist and educator based in Rapid City, South Dakota. Tubles is an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe and was raised in the high plains of South Dakota. He comes from a family of diverse artists. His father, Marty Tubles Sr., is an accomplished artist and was Tubles' first art instructor. Tubles grew up in his father's studio where he learned the fundamentals of sculpture, illustration, graphic design, and most importantly, how to make a living as a creative person. Tubles eventually went on to study printmaking and ceramics at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where he earned a bachelor's in fine arts in 2011. After graduation, Tubles spent several years in Santa Fe developing his art practice and working in contemporary art galleries, where he worked with a plethora of contemporary artists from around the world. In 2017, he was offered a full-time faculty position with Oglala Lakota College, OLC, to teach art. Tubles jumped at the opportunity to return to his homelands and work with his tribal community. Since returning home, Tubles has created a graphic arts program at OLC and continues to work as a positive force for the arts in his communities, both near and far. Tubles has exhibited his artwork in galleries and museums, both nationally and internationally, with works in several museum permanent collections. Thank you for joining us, Marty. Hand it off to you.
Thank you, Rafa. That was a very flattering introduction. I really appreciate your words. It means a lot, coming from you. You're an artist I have a lot of respect for, and Castles as well. Thank you, guys. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm gonna give a little talk now, sort of look at some of my work, talk about my career a little bit, kind of where I'm from, my history. I think it's important to have some of that contextual information with the work, because I think a lot of the I guess my identity tends to be kind of confused, or people get kind of confused by it. So yeah, I'm just going to jump into it. Get my PowerPoint here going. So I'm from South Dakota. I always tell people that I'm from Red Shirt Table. That's where my family's from. Red Shirt Table is on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And this is specifically Red Shirt Table. This is where our family land is. This is kind of the place that is home for me. No matter where I've lived or how long I've been away, this is kind of the place that, one of the places that has kind of always drawn me back. It's a really, really pretty area for those of you that have never been here. We have the Badlands and the plains, and nearby is the Black Hills. I got another slide going. So very nearby, we have the Black Hills, which is sort of like this oasis in the plains, kind of this small mountainous region. There's a lot of granite, kind of rocks and things like that. It's a pretty rural area. I was born in this area. I was born in Rapid City and lived mostly in Rapid City, but kind of moved around quite a bit. And yeah, I'm Ogallala Lakota. I'm enrolled with the Ogallala Sioux tribe. Again, that's the Pine Ridge is our reservation, our lands. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think it's important to kind of talk about sort of the history, like where I am, and sort of the history of Lakota art. There's a map here that kind of outlines the Great Sioux Reservation. This was established in the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. And you can see in the purple, this was the original reservation boundaries. This is the agreement we had with the US government to, this would be our, our final kind of land. These are our territories, and we'd have full kind of sovereignty over these areas. But over the years, as time went by, this original kind of land, these boundaries slowly got whittled down. And you can kind of see the progression of that whittling. And a big part of that had to do with the discovery of gold in the Black Hills. So it's like 1877, they discovered that the Black Hills was rich in gold. So that was removed from our kind of treaty agreements. And there was a gold rush in the region. Lots of big mines were established there. The land was stolen from us, and has been an issue, a point of contention for us since then. We've been fighting, my tribe, but also the other affiliated Lakota tribes have been fighting for that land back. And a big part of that is because the Black Hills is sort of our religious epicenter. Our entire religion and culture is kind of focused and based around the Black Hills. Our ceremonies, our kind of everything is sort of focused in this area. It's a really, really special place for our people. And so yeah, so the things that happened and there were especially kind of sacrilegious, like the mining. There's a lot of really nasty strip mining that happened there. Homestake mine in particular, as this kind of giant strip mine that they extracted millions and millions of dollars worth of gold, and they polluted a lot of the water sources there, and just really ugly kind of exploitation. And yeah, you can see kind of continually up until today, what's in maroon is sort of our current tribal boundaries. These are the reservations. The Lakota people are made up of several bands. The Ogallala are one band of the kind of the great, what they call like the Great Sioux Nation, and that's where we are, kind of down here in Pine Ridge. So with our history, I think one of the things I want to emphasize in this talk is how recent it is. I think a lot of people think about these time periods and these people as being like somewhere far off or a long time ago. Like, you know, this is kind of one of the major players in our history is General George Armstrong Custer. He led the 7th Cavalry, US 7th Cavalry, and was subsequently, you know, beat at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And this is a photo of the last living survivors of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, or we call it the Battle of the Greasy Grass. This is a battle that happened in Montana, and was sort of our great victory against the U.S. government. But yeah, I think the thing that people don't realize is like this history is not that long ago. This photo was taken in 1948. The photographer, Bill Grothe, the man who took this photograph, is still alive today. He's 96. And I've met with Bill and talked to him, you know, and these men in this photograph were men that were at this battle. They were young at the time, but they fought in that battle. And the man on the far right comes again, and he's one of my relatives, my great grandfather. You know, he helped raise my grandfather, and you know, it's not that long ago. This history, it's still very, very recent. And you know, I think a lot of times when people think about this area, I think one of the reasons that they push the history so far back is it kind of helps kind of ignore some of these issues that we're kind of facing today with, you know, just trying to get our land back and fighting for our sovereignty and things like that. Like, you know, this isn't a new thing, and it's not that old, like, especially when you start thinking about history. This is another part of my history, is the Wounded Knee Massacre. You know, this happened in 1890, and this was a massacre that happened against, you know, 300 unarmed men, women, and children, Lakota men, women, and children. There's a photograph of the mass graves, or the bodies from the massacre victims. And for a long time, and I even kind of remember this when I was a kid, like some of the history books would call this they called this a battle. That's the way, like, the greater kind of US kind of history, kind of how they explained it, was as a battle. And at this battle, there were 20 soldiers who were awarded the Medal of Honor, which, like, today, like, the Medal of Honor is like this great grand, you know, award that we give to soldiers for feats of bravery and sacrifice and selfishness. And they awarded 20 of those here to soldiers who participated in this massacre. And you know, this is a part of my history, and it's something that I engage with in my work. I mean, I come from a different art background than a lot of folks. You know, I always acknowledge my father, Marty Tubal Sr., as my, you know, one of my first art instructors, because it's true, and it's an important thing for me to know, because, like, I come from just like a different art practice, or a different art tradition. I want to give you guys a little bit of a palate cleanser, just not to end this kind of history talk on a bad note. These are my daughters. So, you know, there's been a lot of hardship and a lot of sacrifice and, you know, things like that. But as Lakota people, we're still here, and we're still, you know, thriving, and we're still continuing on our traditions and our culture. Yeah, these are my two little girls, Maisie and Odette. They're fashionistas, if you can't tell. They're their own style, their own. So yeah, I guess I want to talk a little bit about some influences. Like, again, this is my dad, Marty Tubal Sr. He's an artist and designer, and an editorial cartoonist. I grew up in his studio, painting and cleaning brushes and, doing chores and things like that. He's definitely my first art teacher, my first kind of inspiration to get into arts. And he really encouraged my growth in the arts. As a young person, he was always giving me his old tools, like his pens and things like that I could use and mess around with and play with. And, I would break some of his tools and, kind of get in trouble for messing around with things I probably shouldn't have been messing around with. And yeah, so he's kind of, he's a really kind of all around artist, but a lot of the work he does is centered around kind of political statements. He's been doing editorial cartoons for quite a while now, and he works primarily on Native issues. He always tells me his audiences are Native people, they're Native people. So this was an editorial cartoon he did around the time of the Standing Rock protests, the No Dapple protests, and examining issues around that, centering it from a Native perspective. This is another one about the Cleveland Indians, the mascot. He's looking at Native issues, making commentary. And a lot of his editorial cartoons, they're relatable. Anybody can kind of get what he's talking about. But in general, he always told me that was his primary audience. And that's something that kind of stuck with me, as I began my own art practice and my own art career, thinking about who my audience is, who I want to reach, who I want to make artwork for. But yeah, he's done some really interesting things. This was a editorial cartoon that he did about a Hep C vaccine that had a really big impact on the world. He was asked to do this illustration for these doctors in Australia who were trying to raise awareness for this generic Hep C cure out of India. There is a hepatitis C cure in the US, but it's under a patent. So they kind of have control over this medication and this treatment. It's like an $84,000 treatment. And if you go through this cycle of treatments, you get cured of Hep C. And it's just really, Hep C is a really nasty illness if you're not familiar with it. Anyways, he created this cartoon and helped bring awareness to this kind of generic cure, which made a really big impact on folks around the world. And I think for me, that type of work had a big impact on me. The power of art, art can be really powerful. It's one of those things, it's like a universal language, if you can do it right, you don't really need to understand the artist's language to get their point or get their idea. And like, for instance, with this cartoon in particular, the group from Australia, the doctor group from Australia who was trying to bring awareness of this generic Hep C cure. I guess they were at like a conference in Belgium, and there were a group of doctors in Belgium who were working on raising money to try to cure Hep C in Africa. And they'd been working with a budget that included the $84,000 kind of commercial treatment. And they saw this editorial cartoon and they became aware of this generic $1,500 treatment, and they had enough time to switch their planning and include this generic treatment, and were able to save like 60,000 more people. Just had a huge impact on these people. So that's a lot of where I think with my work, like one of my goals is to try to make as best as I can positive impact with my work. Sometimes I'm more successful with that, sometimes I'm not. I think one of the things that I face a lot of times is people's misconceptions about who I am and like where I come from, like the kind of work that I make, who are my influences. If you look at my work, a lot of it does have a lot of cultural connections and representations. You know, I can't help, I am who I am, and I'll always have that cultural perspective will always be a part of how I view the world. It'll always be a part of my work. Sometimes it's more blatant, sometimes it's less, but I'm not just like, you know, making Indian art or just making, you know, one particular kind of thing. So I do want to touch on a little bit of these early influences outside of like my dad and sort of these cultural ties, because my family, you know, my dad's an artist, but I also come from a family of artists. Like my uncles and aunts are painters and beaters, and my cousins are artists. Like there's a really rich cultural tradition here in this area that is, you know, has assimilated into a lot of Western practices and a lot of Western systems, but still very much has roots tied outside of those kind of Western influences. So that's like, yeah, it's a lot of my primary kind of background is there, you know. But outside of that, you know, as a young person, going through public schooling and, you know, being taught about art and what was important, a lot of that didn't really connect with me. That, you know, what somebody might call like masters, you know, the kind of Western masters. It really wasn't until I started kind of finding like art made by Black Americans, specifically like from the Harlem Renaissance. This was really a big epiphany for me, finding these artists who had come from sort of these kind of horrific backgrounds through slavery and through segregation and you know, Jim Crow, and the kind of artwork that they were producing and making. This was the art that really connected with me as a young person. This poem in particular is from Paul Laurence Dunbar. He's a poet from that Harlem Renaissance. And yeah, this made sense to me. You know, Michelangelo didn't really make sense to me. You know, who's the other poet that I'm blanking on his name. Anyways, there's a lot of the stuff that was being kind of forced upon me didn't really make a lot of sense as a type of art that I thought was important or that I thought was powerful. And these are some of those kind of influences of the work that I did. So particularly like Paul Laurence Dunbar, you know, Miles Davis, Nina Simone, John Coltrane, you know, what they were doing with their art forms, you know, continuing on from their backgrounds into Western, kind of, you know, including incorporating Western themes and elements, really made a big impact on me. That's kind of where I go with my work, and we'll get there in just a second. There's some more. This is generally like, these are a lot of my influences, like Robert Rauschenberg, Sigmar Polk, Thornton Dial, you know, Picasso, McLean Thomas, Linda Benglis. These are artists who, for me, you know, I started finding more kind of kindred spirits, I guess you could say. And some of it is visual. Some of these things I kind of work similarly in my work, like with the Cornell assemblages. You'll see a lot of like shadow boxes in my work. I'm definitely, you know, very much inspired by his work. Or like Linda Benglis, you know, I connect with Linda in a way, in her sort of statements and in her kind of brashness with her work. You know, this piece in particular that's in the frame was from an advertisement. I'm sure maybe you've seen this in your art history books, but it was an advertisement that she ran in Art in America, I believe. And yeah, just like this real kind of in your face, brash, you know, statement. And that's kind of the work that I find as an influence. And I think it's important as a young artist to start identifying your influences. You know, all art is derivative. I think some people get caught up in thinking about making something new that's never been made before, that's brand new, that people have never seen. and it's important to be authentic and creative and an individual, but you are influenced by your surroundings. The work that you learn about in school or the stuff that you collect or hang on your wall, that all has an impact on you in some way, in positive and negative ways. But I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind and kind of track that in a way. And that's something that I've been doing more and more. I'm 36 now, and I'm just kind of starting to make more of those connections and finding it important and helpful in my work. So yeah, this is an early cyanotype. I'm an interdisciplinary artist because of my background. I grew up mostly drawing and sculpting and painting. When I got to art school, I took it as an opportunity to check out mediums that I didn't have experience with. So I was drawn to printmaking because I never really had done any formal printmaking, and learned how to do intaglio printmaking, lithography, silkscreen. This piece is a cyanotype, which is just like an older form of kind of photography. And I use printmaking in a way that's not traditional. I'm kind of a non-traditional printmaker and ceramicist. I really don't like working in editions. I respect it, and I learned how to do it. But at a certain point, when I'm doing editions, I start to feel like a human copy machine, and it kind of sucks the creativeness out of it for me. So the way I work is in a lot of monotypes, where I'll use like fixed matrices and use them in different ways. So you'll see some of the imagery kind of repeat, because either it's a film or a transparency or a plate or a silk screen or a stencil or something. Like, you'll see a lot of the kind of repeating of imagery. This is another cyanotype on paper, kind of playing with the cyanotype as a painting medium and exploring ideas of identity. These pieces are sort of me looking at my past and my history, where I'm from, trying to do that in a way that felt authentic to me. One of the things that I struggle with is like the way my people, our aesthetic, our art, we're kind of our people are always kind of misrepresenting our culture for a lot of different reasons. We tend to either be overly romanticized or like kind of overly pitied, from either like Dances with Wolves to like that 60 minutes expose that explores the poverty of Pine Ridge. And Pine Ridge is a very poor place. Like, it's one of the poorest counties in the country. There's not a lot of resources there. There's not a lot of infrastructure. But what we lack in money, we have in our culture. We're really lucky to still have our culture. We have our language. We have our religion. A lot of other tribes in the U.S., aren't as lucky, and I see that as a form of wealth. That's something that I kind of look to explore more in my work, and just really try to take back our what Lakota art is and can be. This is some more of my kind of ceramic work. When I first got into clay, I started making ashtrays. I thought it was funny, like it's kind of a joke about like the first ceramic class you take, you make an ashtray or something. And I started making these like called the miracle ashtrays. It's kind of explorations of like Christianity, and in my region, Christianity has a really complicated history. It's was used as sort of one of the main sort of justifications for Western expansion, and was also used to help kind of try to erase our culture and our history. We've had these boarding schools here that, back in the day, they were used to try to like, kill the Indians, save the man. They would cut kids' hair. They would forbid them from speaking their language. My grandmother, one of my grandmothers on my mom's side, she's a product of those boarding schools. They're just real kind of nasty places. You know, and not to say that there weren't, you know, good aspects of Christianity in our reservation. You know, it's yeah, I mean, it's a complicated subject, you know, it's and one that I think it's important to kind of look at both sides. Look at my time. All right. Yeah, so more like mixed media. A lot of the stuff that I do is kind of a mixture of processes. I'm always looking at combining things, trying things out. This was a part of my undergraduate work. I wanted to print on ceramic forms. I didn't really have like I didn't really like the processes that I was being shown, like transferring image transfers or silk screening on the clay. So I started experimenting with using cyanotype, and this kind of where this work comes from. These cyanotypes on ceramic on clay. Yeah, more mixed media, shadow boxes. You know, I went to art school. Sort of went to art school reluctantly. And I think like a lot of young people who are good at making stuff. I've always been kind of good at making stuff. I think I was really cocky about my skill, feeling like, you know, I'm the best at what I do in my high school or my community, and you know, I don't need art school. Like, I want to make money. I want to have a job that, you know, I can have a living off of or whatever. And I studied journalism for like 3 years, kind of thinking that that was my calling. You know, I really like good journalism. I like writing. I like storytelling. But that whole period in school, I was just like making art all the time. Like after I was done with my homework, I'd be making art, and I knew like I'm going to regret not going to art school and, you know, getting to focus on making art. And that's when I made that transition. And yeah, I don't know. I know a lot of you guys are kind of starting out, or, you know, younger in your careers, and like, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I or anybody can really give you a formula for success towards becoming an artist. I never planned on being where I'm at right now. Like, it was just sort of like a lot of, you know, different opportunities that come up. Some, you know, I see, some I didn't. And yeah, I mean, it's, you know, and I think that's true for any degree, really. Like, there's no degree that's going to give you a guaranteed job somewhere. You know, it's a lot of like, you know, being flexible and finding your passion or whatever. And this isn't one of those careers that there's not a lot of money in being an artist. You know, I think if you're interested in making, you know, lots of money, you know, there's other, yeah, like, you can become an accountant or, you know, something like that. That's what's gonna, you know, offer a lot more money. But for me, art has always been a calling. Like, I've always been compelled to make stuff, to, you know, make artwork, to express my ideas. These are from a junk mail series. I was in printmaking, doing my studying printmaking and working with really fancy papers, like rag papers, like Arches or Reeves. And I also wanted to work with some trash paper. So I was collecting junk mail that was coming in and shinkleing them into my prints. So some of these are from, like, you can see like the weird predatory lending, you know, letters that we all get, 100% pre-approved credit, you know, at a crazy interest rate. Some more of that work, paperwork. I got a couple more minutes. So I do want to talk about some of the more recent stuff. And I'm definitely open to answer more questions. This body of work comes from, again, those cultural references, specifically from the Star Quilt. this is an object in our culture that has carried through time. Like today, artists make these out of fabric and they're sewn together and they're used as sort of social cultural currency in a way. Like when you want to honor somebody, you give them a star quilt, and it's like a really big honor when somebody gives you a star quilt. So you get star quilts for like graduating high school, graduating college. You get star quilts for being a pallbearer at a funeral. When my daughters were born, my family gave them star quilts. So I have like these objects that are a part of like contemporary Lakota life, and the objects that I use, they're in my closet. I put them on the beds, and they all have these different kind of memories or experiences tied to them. So I was really looking at kind of creating my own, kind of continuing those explorations into my own kind of medium or in my own way. And that's where this work comes from. It's sort of an exploration of those ideas. And rather than using fabric, I'm using found paper and silk screen and ink to kind of start exploring some of those more complicated ideas about like death and like hope. Like when you give a teenager a star quilt, like what is that? What is their potential? Like how do you quantify, or how do you value that potential? Another series, kind of mixed media series. Again, kind of there was a period of I was kind of examining our death and cultural practices. So these came from a place of like my family has a graveyard on Richard Table. It's an Episcopal church, and there's a graveyard there. My grandfather is a retired Episcopal priest, and my uncle is an Episcopal priest. This graveyard is like all my relatives there, and the throughout the year people bring stuff and leave things, and certain times of year we go through and clean the graveyard out, and the trash gets burned. And one of the things that a lot of people leave is like the like plastic flowers. So I was working with these plastic flowers and altering them in different ways. Again, kind of exploring some of the intersection of these cultural ideas and practices and like contemporary life. So you see that the star quilt geometry again, kind of reappearing in this work. So the ceramic work, I work in a lot of with a lot of slip cast forms, and I've sort of always thought of these as like reminded me of like the printmaking work I was doing, were like kind of monotypes. This was a piece from the show that Rafa had mentioned, the Monarchs exhibition. I collaborated with a fellow artist, Chinupa Hanska Luger. We created this piece called Wasted, which was sort of this assemblage of ceramic detritus, I guess you might say. So bottles and jugs and cans and these different types of vessel forms that are thinking about like contemporary life, like again contemporary cultural life. Some of this is meant to examine issues of like alcoholism and that intersection of our cult with our people, but also just like thinking about contemporary vessels. I think a lot of times when people talk about our historical art practices, it gets romanticized and kind of fetishized. So I'm really looking at like things that people have today in their homes. So like a lot of these pieces are meant to be sort of like representations of what like modern, you might find in like a modern Lakota person's refrigerator. You might find a milk jug or a pop can, or, you know what I mean? That kind of a thing. It's another piece. This is from I was making these sheet cakes, much like the Stark quilts. Sheet cakes are a big part of our contemporary culture. Especially like a funeral, people bring cakes. There's one of these things that, over time has become like this kind of special object. So yeah, I mean, if you go to a Lakota funeral or celebration, you're going to see sheet cakes, and a lot of times there's pictures of people and writing on them, and there's always a big show when there's a cake. Like literally, like somebody will take the cake around the room, and everybody looks at the cake and admires it. It's sort of this kind of contemporary cultural currency. So I was kind of looking at that and thinking about it, thinking about the context. This is made out of plaster. I had to learn how to do plaster piping. Did a few of these things in this series, these cakes. And you can't really see it in this photo, but it is like a cake. It's like a three-dimensional sculpture. Yeah, kind of looking at some of those contemporary elements. I'm at 40 minutes. I'm not sure.
You're fine, Marty. I say keep going. It's fantastic.
Okay. Cool. So this is kind of some more recent work. This was a piece from a show that I curated at the Lux Art Center in Lincoln. This is the show was called Dementia Americana, and it was myself, Chinipa Hanskal Luger, and my cousin Michael Tubols. And the idea in the exhibition was sort of bringing in contemporary Native voices and sort of commenting on kind of those old kind of established kind of Western narratives about like America, about the West, about Native peoples, all these sort of different ideas. I really feel like narratives are so powerful in our culture, from the way we tell our history in our school books to the way we tell it in movies and popular culture. And I think a lot of the work that I do, I try to challenge those narratives and kind of create a new way of looking at some of those concepts or historical things or whatever. So yeah, this is a piece. This is neither good nor bad medicine. It's a medicine cabinet. There's a lot of things going on here. There's a cyanotype in the back, some of that same imagery from you've seen before, those fixed matrices. The cigarettes on the bottom are all clay. We wanted to put cigarette butts in this thing, but I didn't want to use real cigarette butts because I knew how stinky it would be. So Chinupa like spent a whole day just like making these really beautiful little cigarette butts. And we're both, both ex-smokers, and it's kind of an interesting process because like I know how a cigarette butt looks. I know the amount of detail you need to put into it. They really wanted them to look real. And that buffalo skull in the front is just a commercial printing process. They call them like, I can't remember, UV print. It's not quite a silk screen, but that skull is the skull that's in my house. That's the skull from my buffalo that I killed for my manhood ceremony when I was a teenager. It's something that I live with and something that has it's an important part of my cultural identity, kind of my day-to-day life. It's something that's the front of my house, so it's there when you come into my house. And I really wanted to, and it's not something I do normally tell like a lot of people. I think that's one thing I struggle with my work is people want to hear like a magic story from me about my work. Because I'm a Native person, I get fetishized a lot in kind of Western art dialogues. And my stance generally with my work is sort of to let it, put it out there and kind of let it be and speak for itself. I'm not averse to talking about it and engaging with it. And in this environment, in an educational environment, I'm really open to these kind of conversations. In commercial environments, like in galleries and things like that, I'm a lot more, I don't share as much about this work. Some more of the medicine cabinets. I like the medicine cabinets because they're one of those places, like it's a ubiquitous object. Like we've all interacted with medicine cabinets, and we have them in our homes. It's this place we go. It's like a place of reflection. We look at ourselves in the mirror, we groom ourselves. It's filled with our essentials, medication, toothbrush, dental floss. It's sort of this place of like this kind of contemporary place of meditation in some ways. And it's one of those objects, I am examining a lot of, issues and ideas related to my culture, but there are a lot of overlaps, there's a lot of things that are in contemporary Lakota life that are also in contemporary American life, And this is one of those spaces that I really feel like everybody has some context for. More of assemblage, vessel. I started calling these things traditional artifacts. I was really thinking about the way our culture is categorized by Western institutions, whether they're archaeological or anthropological, or even like in the contemporary Native art world. A lot of times the people that are collecting and categorizing and labeling and organizing our art are non-natives, or people not from our culture. So that's where you see like these, I think, these misrepresentations of like Indians on horseback and the general stereotypes. So with this work, again, I'm looking at like thinking about contemporary Lakota life, what that means, what that looks like. Yeah, I mean, this is a contemporary Lakota vessel, it's not magic necessarily, it's hard to romanticize, but it's a part, it's a part of it. More of the ceramic stuff. So outside of like kind of the more of the fine art, like printmaking, where I'm using like fine art processes like printmaking or clay or whatever, I do a lot of graphic design, and that's a way that I've kind of kept myself going in the lean times. Like as an artist, I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's feast and famine. Like you might have one good month or year where you sell a lot of work and there's a lot of opportunities and you get a big grant or a big fellowship. And then you might have another year, another month where just like there's nothing and the money dries up, and you got to find a way to support yourself and to keep yourself going. One of the things that the artists in my life had always encouraged me to do was keep a trade, like a practical trade that I could lean on if I needed to. And for me, that's been graphic design. It's really been a way for me to work and make money and have health insurance, but also to work creatively. Like I don't think I can work in a traditional kind of office setting. I can't be a bean counter. Like I need to work, even if it's not me making stuff that I necessarily am that crazy about, or or is that groundbreaking. Like it's still like I'm engaging my creative faculties. So one of the things, especially recently, and I don't want to misconstrue this, like as Lakota people, we've always been like fighting since the Battle of the Little Bighorn through, the retaking of our land, into, No Dapple, which has kind of become like a more something that people are a lot more conscious of these days, you know, and they kind of think like, whoa, Indians are mad now. Like, when did this happen? We've been mad for a long time, and you know, we've been fighting for a long time for our rights and for our land and our dignity, you know, our identity. And recently, you know, where I'm at, there were, you know, like in many parts of the country, you know, there's been a lot of protests, Black Lives Matter protests, and there's been a lot of support from Native people, Lakota people, and you know, I support Black Lives Matter, and you know, I support that movement. And one of the things as an artist, like I'm a maker, like I can make things. I can make stickers, I can make patches, I can make posters, and it's a privilege in a lot of ways. Like I've been lucky enough to gone to school and had good mentors and a lot of opportunity. And I really try to use that privilege in a way like to make positive change. And you know, one of the things I noticed with like our Black Lives Matter movements here in our region, where like a lot of the young people didn't have good graphics, you know, they weren't able to like, they didn't have a way of expressing their solidarity that was easily or very cleanly done. So I made this graphic kind of in support of the movement, and also as a tool for other Lakota people to show their support and you know, express an authentic Lakota aesthetic. So the language underneath is it's a Lakota for Black Lives Matter, and it's in our language. And yeah, it's one I made and kind of put out for anybody to use. So I really tried not to make this about me. So like, there's no signature, there's no like use agreement or anything, as long as like people aren't making money off of it, you know, like, and not in a, I mean, not in like a fundraising way, but like in the kind of capitalist, like that's something that happens a lot with our art, is people steal it and print t-shirts and kind of sell Indian art that way. But yeah, and it's been interesting. A lot of people like this and use this, and it felt really good to add something positive. And it's a small way. I mean, it's a really small thing that I could do, but yeah, it just felt good, and it's a good way to contribute. Finally, shoot, we're going kind of long. I don't want to take up too much of the time. This is another recent piece from an issue that happened here recently with the COVID-19. From the very beginning, our tribe, the Ogallala Sioux tribe, took a really strong stance on quarantine. The tribe said, hey, you know, we don't have the resources to battle this. Like in a good year, our healthcare system is not very good, you know, especially with the pandemic, like it's just going to wreak havoc on our community. So the tribe set up these health checkpoints. So when you come to Pine Ridge, all of the major entrances into our reservation, there are these health checkpoints, and sometimes they let people in. Periodically, they go on these like really hardcore lockdowns. Like they're in the middle of one right now, or they just started one right now because the numbers have been so bad. And it's all from a place of just wanting to protect the community. You know, there is a lot of poverty in Pine Ridge. There's not a lot of resources, there's not a lot of hospitals, there's not a lot of ventilators, ambulances. You know, it's really a poor area. And it was a pretty simple thing that they're trying to do, but unfortunately we have a really aggressive kind of staunch Republican governor who from the very beginning started demanding that the tribes open their borders, saying that the tribes didn't have the legal ability to do that, to restrict access. And it doesn't make any sense. Like non-natives don't go to Pine Ridge unless they're there as tourists. You know, there are a few business things that happen and a few ranchers, but the tribe has always protected those people access. You know, if you have a business, you know, you get supplies in, or if you have cattle somewhere, if you're leasing tribal land to raise cattle, like they've always allowed that sort of access. It was more of a power play. It draws on these bigger issues, these bigger historical issues going back to the very beginning, looking at how our land has been slowly whittled down. You know, even like with the pipeline stuff, this governor is preparing for another big pipeline that's slated to come through our region. That's the Keystone XL Pipeline. So one of the other things that she's been doing, besides like trying to step on tribal sovereignty, is like preparing a lot of legislation that will make it a lot harder for people to protest another pipeline. So she's really looking at what happened in North Dakota and learning from that, having laws prepared for essentially like rural protests, making it a lot easier to arrest people and to use, you know, excessive force. And it's all sort of tied to this long history. But this piece, you know, I wanted to make something for my community to use, especially, and I was thinking about like those health checkpoint people who catch a lot of flack, like they get threatened. The people that go down to our border just to like raise hell with the border checkpoint people. And there's been threats of like sending the police or National Guard. That hasn't happened yet, and hopefully it doesn't. But yeah, it's still an issue. Like we still have this quarantine, and she's still trying to get us to open our borders. She's gone to President Trump and asked him for his help, and he's threatened to withhold federal funding if we don't open our borders. And all this is totally illegal. Our treaty that we signed with the federal government, 1868, the Fort Laramie Treaty, this is what grants us our sovereignty, and that's the text that you see along the border of this image. The primary image is our flag, the Oglala Sioux tribe flag. It's normally red and white, but I wanted to signify the quarantine. And you know, one of this is inspired from those old signal flags, the nautical signal flags that they'd use back in the day before like radio communication. A ship would fly up these flags up on their masts, and they'd read each other's flags, and they could communicate that way. That's what this is. It's the international signal flag for quarantine. So if a ship ran one of these flags up its mast, you knew that there was an issue and that they were under quarantine. I'm a little worried about my audio. Can you hear me okay still?
Yeah, sounds good. Just right.
Okay. So yeah, so I made this thing, and I gave a bunch of these to the border people to use as sort of a physical kind of manifestation of like that idea of like sovereignty and protection, and like literally printed the entire treaty around the outside of the flag for people to use. And yeah, it's been a good, again, kind of bringing that a contemporary, like authentic aesthetic into, I guess, Lakota arts. These are my links. This is my website, where a lot of the work is. I also use my Instagram quite a bit. That's there too. But yeah, it's kind of it.
Great. Marty, thank you so much. That was so exciting for me. I'm also a printmaker. I don't know if I let you know that when I met you earlier this week. So it's great to have a kindred spirit here tonight. I'm going to invite the students to add some questions to the chat, and that usually takes a moment for that to come in. And while we're waiting, I have a couple questions for you. As a maker and a person that infuses the meaning in with the making, I wonder if there are times, especially when you're learning some of the heavy, deep skills in printmaking, when you recognize that, okay, this is what I'm doing now to learn this skill, to hone my skills in drawing and design and digital work. But I have a bigger agenda in that I know I'm going to combine this with the meaning or the concept. And I guess talk about the balance of being an artist that is a maker, where that requires some certain hours of investment, as well as a thinker.
Yeah, so it does. It certainly does. Like those ceramic bottles with the cyanotype on them, that was like 4 months of work, like cumulative work. I had this idea, I wanted to do it, but every time like I tried to do it, there was always a problem. There's a lot of different chemicals interacting with each other, and it took a lot of problem solving and troubleshooting. And it looks like I didn't just like put cyanotype on the ceramic forms. I had to put like paper. I had to put paper sizing on the clay so it would hold the cyanotype and separate the chemicals. And it was a lot of work, like a lot of boring trial and error work. And yeah, I mean, whenever I'm in a place like that, I do try to keep in mind, like, okay, like I do have this end goal. I might not see it for a few months, or in some cases even longer than that. But I really try to hold on to remind myself that as much as I can, and also remind myself too, like art making is a physical activity, much the same way like playing basketball is a physical activity. There are different levels of physical exertion and endurance, but there's still like physical skills like dexterity and eye-hand coordination. And I try to remind myself that a lot of the things that I do are sort of like practice, like the way an athlete might run laps or do sit-ups. Like I'm practicing in my own kind of way. And that sort of helps me make sense of that sort of work.
Great. Yeah. Questions are piling in. Here's one. As a Native student, I'm constantly painted a certain way from the moment people meet me. How have you handled being labeled a certain way, and how have you channeled that into your pieces?
I really try to push back against that. One of my art heroes is Miles Davis. And one of the reasons I really like him, a bit outside of his work, is the way he interacted with his audience. Like Miles Davis was one of those jazz musicians. He came from a tradition of musicianship where a lot of the artists before him would like talk to the audience. They would joke with the audience. They're real charismatic figures when they're on stage. Where Miles Davis is really like a real kind of a jerk. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't, play to his audience in that way. In some ways, he was really rude, but in other ways, he really kind of protected himself and his art. And so, I don't know. Sometimes, you got to be Miles Davis and just, tell people to F off. And other times, you just got to say no to things. Like as a Native artist, there are a lot of opportunities that will come up that are like, come from places of like trying to fetishize you or use you as an exotic element in an exhibition, and really requires a lot of forethought and thinking about that opportunity. And sometimes you just got to say no, like I'm not going to participate in this thing. It doesn't feel right to me. Or speaking up, and that can be hard, especially in a world where you're looking for acceptance and approval. And I've had people that I've respected, academics or curators who I thought I wanted to work with, and it became clear that their ideas about me and my work were not ideas that I wanted to support. And yeah, just having to say no, and that's hard. It's a hard skill to learn and to practice.
I think a follow-up to this would be a question that comes from Jennifer. You brought up the fetishizing and romanticism of your culture and your people. Is there anything that we can do as college students to try and get rid of those ideas and stigmas?
Yeah, just learn and read. I provided some readings for one of the classes. There were some contemporary pieces of journalism that I collaborated with on the visuals, but there were stories about things that are happening today. Some of them are issues that are rooted in the past, but do definitely have like present ramifications. So yeah, just like learning and being open-minded, checking things out. I think that's a good practice to have in general as an artist, always kind of expanding your boundaries and looking for new information. I mean, I can't really give you like one book to read or one site to go to, but just be curious and check stuff out.
Great. Yeah. What has doing this work done for you mentally, spiritually, and emotionally?
It's fulfilling. Like I said, I can't do anything else. Like I'm an artist, and it's just a part of who I am, and I always have to be making stuff, whether it's received well or not, or whether it makes me money, or it's just something I always have to do. And it fulfills me. And especially recently, teaching has been kind of a new venture for me. I think like I have to make art, and I also have to make money. And if I can make those two things intersect in some way, it makes me happier. Some of the harder subjects that I explore in my work can be really draining, like especially around like death or addiction or those kind of ideas. And yeah, sometimes I just gotta take breaks from that type of work or that subject matter, and move somewhere else with my creative energy. Whether that's like, I'm a musician as well. I play music, so a lot of times like I'll just stop making like physical objects and just play music for a while, or read, or
Great. Several people, including myself, want to know more about your influence with your father. I'm wondering if there's ways in which he, seeing you as a artist now and the different mediums that you're working in, has that influenced his studio practice? And then the second part of the question is about whether your artistic endeavors and making work around your family have begun to influence your daughters.
Yeah. So definitely, I mean, we really do influence each other, my father and I. We have different art practices, and we make different types of artwork. But I think a lot of that thread of like storytelling is still there, like looking at some of these cultural issues and making connections and kind of communicating ideas around those things is there. And yeah, I mean, he's a major influence of mine. And as far as my influence on him, I see it in a lot of ways, like a lot of the stuff that he's exposed to, like music and other forms of art making. Like I feel like I've had been able to show him new things and new stuff. And yeah, and that has definitely carried into like my kids. Like I am who I am today because of my dad's encouragement and my parents and my relatives, the way they encouraged me in the arts and continue to encourage me. And I try to be that way for my daughters and my nieces and nephews and those younger artists that I work with and for in my job as a teacher for a tribal college. Like I want to model those mentors that had big influences on my career.
We have several people that want to know, what is your favorite piece that you've made, or I would say body of work, or something that I guess you feel most still very strongly about?
Um, I think of that bandana, that quarantine flag, because it's actually like a physical. We saw like the digital version, but it's like a physical object. This was new territory for me, because it is kind of this is kind of anti-gallery system. Like this, I had this idea. I knew I wanted to do something like this, and the more I tried to use sort of more of my like fine art practices, the less it seemed like the thing to do. Like I could have made a print, on made a lithograph or something, and I would have had to have priced it really high and tried to get it into a show or a collection somewhere. But what I really wanted was I wanted this to be in the hands of Lakota people in my area, my community members, my tribal members. And that's happened. Like it's really cool to see like, people using these and using it as like a symbol of pride and like resilience, but also like as a teaching tool. Like the treaty it's in its entirety all the way around this thing. And I really think it's cool that somebody can use this as a mask or to blow their nose or to sit down and like when they're bored, go through and actually read that document. So it's been a really interesting, multifaceted piece of artwork, and in general, kind of where I find myself going more and more, being less enticed by that kind of Western gallery system of like making really expensive objects and trying to sell them for crazy prices and get praise from rich folks, and like I have had work go that direction, and the thing that always kind of bugs me is that work like disappears. Like when something goes into a museum collection, like I feel like not many people get to see it, especially my people, where I'm from, and a lot of the work that I make, like I really do want them to see it, and I want their take on it. I want their opinions. I want their feedback. So yeah, I guess that bandana has been probably one of my favorite recent works.
Great. Just to kind of follow up on this idea of capitalism, we have a great question here from Sage, and it's long, so I'm going to read it, but just here we go. I love the way you said the preservation of Lakota culture, language, religion as a form of wealth. I'm interested in really any hierarchy of value outside of what capitalism defines as important or productive. I'm positive that the preservation of culture, people, experiences, stories are so much more valuable than any value that capitalism can ever assign. You also expressed awareness of the misconceptions and misunderstandings that confine your community, over romanticized and over aestheticized, and this idea that Indigenous peoples should be pitied. I was curious, do you ever feel pressured to have to correct the quote history white America teaches? And if so, how do you approach re-representing or correcting the West's watered down lies that is so dangerously believed and ingrained within our culture? If not, what would you tell an artist who feels pressure on behalf of the marginalized communities that they are a part of to correct the lies the dominant group spreads about our communities?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things that happens to me, and I know this happens a lot to other Native peoples, usually when we leave our traditional communities, a lot of times, like, if I go to any other major city, like I'm one of the few Native people in that community. So like, when I go to LA or something, like I'm like a super minority. And when people find out I'm Native, like I all of a sudden become like the ambassador to wherever I'm at, from Pine Ridge or from the Lakota people. And it's something I try to be really careful about because I'm not an official ambassador, cultural ambassador. I don't speak for my tribe. I don't speak for my community. Like, I can only really speak for myself. But a lot of times I get thrust into like really complicated and important conversations where like I do have to address these kind of false narratives or recorrect some of that stuff. And yeah, it's sometimes I'm up for it, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I need to channel Miles Davis, and sometimes I got to be engaged with people. And yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like in some ways, I want to say like I don't want to be that person, but sometimes you do have to challenge those things. And I think, as somebody from the outside, what I would encourage to start, breaking some of those narratives or making those corrections is really, like I said, be curious. The stuff that gets force fed to you in like a traditional Western, history class isn't all there is. You need to seek out other information. You need to support other information. A lot of our cultures are American culture is based on consumerism. What we consume, what do you buy, what do you listen to, what do you pay tickets to go see, start looking at other places to, channel some of that consumption, because but yeah, it's a weird system, and yeah, we kind of fit into it, but we definitely don't. And when things are good, when things go back, when we come out of this sickness, this era of sickness, I really encourage you to come check out Pine Ridge. If you want to meet Lakota people, come out and check it out. That's kind of the best way to do that.
Oh, I hope to. Thank you. We have a question coming in from a viewer on YouTube from the live stream. Do you feel a responsibility to present Lakota culture in a certain way, or do you believe it's actually more harm than good to be labeled as a spokesperson by Americans?
I can't help but be labeled as a spokesperson when that comes up. Again, I always try to preface these kind of talks and things like that they're just my opinion. I'm not a tribal leader. I'm not a traditional leader. I'm just a person, just an artist. But I do feel, I don't know, I do feel the pressure, the aesthetic pressures from what people want to see from me, what kind of work they want to see, and also like how they want me to talk about the work. There are some really personal elements and ideas and histories embedded within my work, and some of it I won't ever talk about because it's for me. Either you get it or you don't. There are other parts like kind of what we did with this history, little kind of history talk. It's kind of necessary to bring up and to portray and to educate and communicate about. But yeah, I mean, it's a weird, Native art's its own weird thing, like historically, but also even we have federal laws that protect our artwork. We're the only cultural group in the U.S. that has a federal law that says, if you call something Native made, that it has to be made by a Native person. You can go to federal prison if you break that law. It's a really weird. It's called the Native Arts. I'm messing this up. I can't remember the name of the law. It's like the Native Arts and Crafts Protection something. But yeah, not many people realize that, but it's sort of a strange thing.
Oh, that's amazing. Marty, what are you working on now? And do you have any future things in the works, your ideal dream goals?
I'm working on doing a lot of clay stuff, or trying to do a lot of clay stuff. I recently got a new kiln that I haven't really got to use the way I want to yet. So kind of back into the hand stuff. I've been doing a lot of digital work, especially with my teaching, where our school is totally online right now, which has been kind of challenging. So I'm on the internet, like I'm on the computer like all the time for teaching, but also been doing a lot of illustration for different things. So I'm trying to get away from that. I need to get my hands dirty again. I'm not one way or the other. I'm not totally opposed to digital work or totally opposed to like hand stuff. I really need both in my practice to feel fulfilled. So yeah, I'm trying to get my hands dirty again, get away from the computer. Playing a lot of music lately. My goals for the future, I've really been enjoying teaching. I like working with young artists, especially Lakota artists, and that's been really good and fulfilling, but also it's been good for my own practice. Like these kinds of conversations and these periods of reflection help me thinking about like the next things I want to do. So yeah, in the future, I hope to just keep teaching. I don't know if that's going to be necessarily with this university. Some of the bureaucracy, teaching in a college is really not for me. I'm not a fan of the higher learning commission regulations and things like that. I'd rather just have a more informal practice, but that is what it is.
Great. Do you have any, I'm just going to throw it out to you, any final words that you want to share with our young undergrads here? Primarily, we have a few grads, but mostly it's an undergrads class.
Yeah, I think if I was going to, last thing I kind of want to leave with you guys is just to encourage you to keep making. I'm not sure what people's practices are, but we're in really uncertain times right now, and galleries are closing, museums are closing or scaling back. A lot of the traditional mechanisms for the distribution of art and commerce is changing. But I kind of also think it's a really exciting time. I think it's time to see a shift in the way we make and consume art in this country. And, I want to encourage you to think about it that way rather than just as like, well, what am I going to do after my undergrad? Like how, it's, there's a lot of opportunity out there, and, your voices are important. The work that you do is important.
Thank you. That's so generous. Thank you so much. Thanks again, Marty. Before I let everybody in the class go, I did promise that Jordan can come forward and make an announcement. So she's got her screen on.
Yeah, sorry. So hi, everybody.